Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for attending the first of four conversations that we are going to have with composers in this virtual series. As I hope you all know by now, this is Eastman's centennial year, and as part of the centennial, we've commissioned more than 50 composers to write new works for our ensembles, faculty ensembles, student chamber groups, soloists, and it's been a fantastic year already of premieres. This collaboration between esteemed composers, many of whom are alumni, guests, faculty, and students, I believe this embodies the passion and creativity that has always been a hallmark of Eastman since its inception, well, now 100 years ago. So I'm really excited about this four-part series, and I hope you will join us for the others that will be coming up. March 23rd will be composers Billy Childs and Joseph Schwantner. April 26th, Maria Schneider. And on May 1st, John Clayton and Bill Dobbins. So I hope you enjoy this backstage experience. And what we hope to do is just have a conversation. In this virtual world, we just have to picture there's a virtual coffee table that we are all sitting around. I am so pleased to be able to introduce composer and Eastman alumna Hannah Lash. Hannah has just been a remarkable composer with works performed, well, in all of the major venues in this country and others, including Carnegie Hall, Walt Disney Concert Hall, Lincoln Center, Times Center in Manhattan, and many others. She's also a marvelous harpist, and so glad to have Hannah with us. Also is Dr. William Weinert, the professor and conductor of the Eastman Chorale. And we have two members of the chorale with us, Karen Goldfeder, who is a master's degree student, and James Wolter, who is a Doctor of Musical Arts candidate. So to all of you, welcome. It's great to have you here. And I'm going to start by asking a question, and you know, I'm primed with questions, but I hope we might just have a conversation and we can follow off of each other. So Hannah, I'm going to start with the first question for you, and that is if you could just walk us through this creative process of composing, and specifically composing your new work, Canticum Psalmi Folsum, Sing Psalms Are False.
Sure, absolutely. So with this piece, you know, it's interesting. I was thinking about it for quite a long time before actually setting pen to paper. And I was imagining how I might like to approach a piece for choir, and what I might like to have be part of the ensemble, you know, the instrumentation along with the choir and all of this. And a piece that I've always been really fond of performing the harp part in is Stravinsky's Symphony of Psalms. Such a cool piece and such a satisfying harp part to play. And there are so many interesting colors. And I love that he took these Psalms. And so I thought, well, you know, maybe I'll sort of respond to this in some way and pick some Psalms and kind of, you know, I'd composed this Requiem a few years back, where I basically took the Requiem text and secularized it and made it quite personal, and then, you know, set it from there. So I thought maybe I would do something similar with a Psalm or two and see what happened. And then, you know, the pandemic hit. And it's interesting. I really felt as though something shifted for me, as I think it probably has for many of us, you know, emotionally and creatively. And it felt somehow as though, I don't know how to put this, because I've never felt that I've had, you know, like pretense creatively, but it was almost as if anything other than the most bare bones, honest, like all out there kind of thing was just completely impossible. And in fact, where I was emotionally at that point was sort of this sense of like vibratory tension, which I think, again, I'm not alone in that. I think a lot of us were feeling this sense of like a little bit of desperation in the pandemic, with, you know, all of this crazy stuff that's going on. And this sense too that, you know, as a creative art form that relies upon community, we were also isolated from each other. So the sense of then what this piece was going to be shifted a little bit for me at that point. And in fact, it became a much more poignant and in some ways biting, but also funny, ironic, earnest type of thing. And in fact, the idea that these texts should actually be absurd really seemed to me actually much more poignant emotionally at that point than a totally earnest approach to a psalm. So what I ended up doing was I actually wrote these texts wholesale, didn't take them from any point of inspiration from the existing psalms at all, but I did want to use a kind of a rhetoric that reminded me of the rhetoric from the King James translation of the Bible, for example. So I used this sort of rhetorical turn of phrase and constructed the poem that's sort of this psalm-like thing, which is basically nonsense. And then what I did was I translated it into Latin, and then I translated it with Google Translate into Latin from there, which was kind of this crazy experience because, Google Translate is not a human. So the things that come out are not wholly sensible. So what I ended up doing was I put it into Google Translate into Latin and then spat that back out from Google Translate into English and then spat it back in Latin and then out in English. So the versions of the poem are actually permutations, as it were, as helped by this logarithm. And, I curated them to a large extent, I must say, but still the idea of, how can I put this? Being, I think, at the mercy of a force outside of myself a little bit was part of what this piece was indeed as well. So the sense of, the musical idioms too plays a big role in terms of how this sense of absurdity and poignancy and, earnestness turning on a dime to become irony really comes into play. There's a movement of it that's a really carefully written fugue, which in some sense is probably the most earnest expression on my part. And then some of it seems to kind of almost lean on an idiom of contemporary gospel, and others of it kind of goes onto a more poppy direction, and then sometimes it comes back into a much more sort of sweeping romantic idiom. So it's a little bit all over the map, but for me, I felt as though that was the only way that I could actually really hit the nail on the head emotionally in terms of what it was expressively that I really wanted to do.
Wow, that's fantastic. I'm curious, when you talk about that you have various different settings in this, gospel and others, did you predetermine that from the text of a given poem? Or again, was it something you sort of discovered in the composition process that you're going to take this particular piece that direction?
A little bit of both, I think. A lot of composition for me happens, discovering things along the way, and that's oftentimes what I find to be so incredibly compelling about it, is the fact that these things sort of, I find them and they find me, and it's very spontaneous in a lot of different ways. But at the same time, it also feels as though it's a little bit like growing crystals. Like you have something initially, and it's going to grow certain formations that are going to be there. So they all have to be kind of organically grown. But at the same time, you never know exactly what kind of formation is going to happen exactly there until you get there. So there's something about that kind of process of discovery that I really, every time I sit down to write, that's kind of what I'm waiting for. In a way, it feels like, waiting to discover a creature that you've never seen before, and you don't know how it moves exactly, but you're looking for it. And so that's to me what's really kind of compelling about that process.
Wow. And how about your composition process personally? Are you the kind of composer who, every morning you are composing from 6 to 9 a.m. and you're disciplined, or you say, oh, I'm going to block out this month for this piece that I know is coming? And, how do you keep moving forward a given composition and knowing you have multiple compositions in the queue?
Yeah. Well, I'm not really very systematic in the way that I sit down and write and make things happen. It's funny. I feel like I demand a kind of a balance in my life between a very disciplined practice schedule where I know I'm going to sit down and, depending upon what my day is like, I'm going to fit in my 4 hours of practice or whatever it happens to be someplace in that day. So that has to be like really, really solid for me. And that's kind of my ritual, I guess I would say. But then the composition part of it needs some chaos for me. I need this sense of unpredictability, and there's a little bit of wildness involved that I don't think that I could do without. So I really, sometimes I'll go for a long, really stretch without writing much of anything. And then I will stay up and not sleep for a period of like 2 weeks or something while I'm really working on something hard. And so that tends to be my pattern of things. I do, however, that said, I do have to say that if I go for too long without writing something, I get really, my I don't know how to put this nicely. I become a grump, so I have to sit down and do something at that point or another when I find that, things have become bad and my friends are starting to find that I'm not fun to be around.
It reminds me of a Snickers bar commercial, I think, where somebody says, you really need a Snickers.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it is.
Go compose.
Yeah, exactly. Like a friend who knows me very well is like, don't you think that it's time now?
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. That was great. And Bill, Hannah said something that I thought was really interesting. She talked about this is a creative art form reliant on community. And I'm not sure there's any place that's more emblematic than choral singing. So, one, could you talk briefly about what the choral experience was like in the COVID world of online? And for those of you who don't know, the first 3 weeks of our semester were online again. We came back together February 1. So Bill and his colleagues in the conducting ensemble department had to think about meaningful ensemble experiences online. And you have a premiere coming up that you had to prepare for. So I'd love if you could talk a little about that, and then the difference now that you're together and able to sing as a real choir.
Well, that brings up the whole issue of the pandemic. And I do have to say, the whole 2021 year, when many institutions were just shut down completely, many of them, we were able to kind of keep going very much here. I mean, we were standing 12 feet apart. Of course, we were wearing masks, and we had all sorts of limitations of rehearsal time. But in other words, coming back in September, this past September, wasn't such a huge thing. I mean, it was great. We could have more people in the room, but we did have a continuous choral experience really through the whole pandemic, except for the spring of 20. Anyway, yeah, we missed 3 weeks in January. And one great thing was we had Hannah do a Zoom meeting with the ensemble, and several ensembles, actually. We had a whole, like 100 people there. And that was a really great exchange. So that we also had, maybe this was a little bit through the back door, but we had a couple of sessions where Eastman alumni and others who were professional choral singers Zoomed with the ensemble and talked about what that was like. And actually, Karen was one of them. She's done a lot of professional choral singing, and James has done some as well. But we had a lot of people, mostly from New York and some from the West Coast, talking about preparation, responsibility, collegiality, not being a jerk, that kind of stuff, that will get you hired for this experience. And, my backdoor kind of intention was, oh yeah, maybe our students should hear this. So, oh yeah, we'll start to learn from that and behave that way. Anyway, even more than they already do. But when we came back a couple of weeks ago, it was a big challenge. This piece is about a half an hour, so it's not a whole concert. And we had music for the rest of the concert, which we had to kind of triage and revise what that was going to be. But yeah, basically, well, I go back to something Hannah just said about the piece being kind of wild. And she said back in January, quite a few comments about how it kind of has to seem like fun, and we're being kind of wild with it and seeming like having fun. And boy, that is the hard part, because people are, you know, it was just funny to kind of look in rehearsals, you look out and people are looking at the notes really hard, not like they're having fun. I don't know, maybe Karen and James have some thoughts about, because you were back there in the trenches, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd love to chime in.
Go for it,
You
Karen.
first, James.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I think, you know, when we missed those 3 weeks of rehearsal, we did some alternative activities that were very beneficial, but I have to give credit to Dr. Weinert, who, you know, put forth a schedule, an updated schedule where we had quartet and octet testing right away to.
Karen, I think you have to pick it up from there.
All right, well, we'll hear the end of James's thought when he gets back online. So, you know, I thought there was some serendipity involved, as well as Dr. Weinert's fine organizational skills. But the fact that this piece was so challenging and that we needed to pivot to being online for a month gave Dr. Weinert an excuse to say to the choir, okay, now it's your responsibility. We have both individual responsibility and collective responsibility. And in order to function as an organism, all of you need to start developing a relationship with this piece yourself. And I really felt like there was a tremendous change in energy in the room when we came back, both on this piece where, yeah, people are still, their knuckles are a little white, gripping the edge of the score, but also, you know, we're doing Bach on the same program, the Bach fugue, which I felt people were just wrapped around the axle about, now seems like familiar territory to them. They've relaxed into it. The contrast between the structure of Bach's fugue and the structure of Hannah Lash's fugue has helped some pennies start to drop, I think. And, you know, it's hard for me as somebody who's been in a lot of choral situations not to be a bit of a sociologist watching all the students. But I really think something significant is happening with the combination of the material, with the eccentric little stage directions and cues, which I've heard people reading out loud. It's like it's giving them, I see for many of the individual students that it's giving them a window into thinking about individual creativity and thinking of themselves as artists in the world and coming together to make some kind of statement that maybe can't be summed up in a soundbite. You know, a statement about this is what it feels like to live in the contemporary world and have heard all these different kinds of music. Anyway, so I think it's been a great experience for the group to work on the piece.
That's fantastic. I love that to you and to Dr. Weinert, that idea of it's not just a collective responsibility. We have individual responsibility here. And maybe we've always known that pre-COVID, that somehow this amplified it because, again, the amount of time you're going to spend together was just suddenly shortened by 3 weeks. And so you have to approach that differently. That's fantastic. James, yeah, James, it looks like you're back.
Yeah, apologies about the Wi-Fi. Usually this spot is fine, but oh well, here we are. So yeah, Karen hit pretty much exactly what I was going to say. I was just going to add that after we did those octets and people were actually volunteering, like, yes, I've done the work. I have put my time in the practice room singing these chromatic lines. That we have had graduates, prospective students in conducting for their callback auditions work with these movements and really kind of benefit from the work, from the structure that Dr. Weinert put forth with the individual small group tests, and really start to extract some of those really fun elements, whether it's, hey, we're in triplet right now, and then boom, we have to change to more of a duple rhythm, and how can we have fun with that? And it really changed a lot of people's perspective of, if this is not just an esoteric, weird, absurd work, there's a lot of fun things to dig into. You just have to get past those basic building blocks, which does require, as you said, individual commitment.
Yeah. I'm wondering, from a performer standpoint, do you have a different mindset preparing or performing Bach, which has been performed innumerable times over hundreds of years, and the piece that will be heard for the very first time by your ensemble?
Well, I'm going to jump in because, that's absolutely true. Of course, Bach motets we're working on Sing dem Herrn, which is really like the hardest one. But it's been performed many times, but not by these people. I always think that it's really brand new to 95% of anybody in a college who's singing. Hardly anybody has sung it before, so it's a brand new piece. And how do you make that come to life? And also, probably brand new for 95% of the listeners too. I mean, even though it's out there, been out there forever, but most people just don't listen to this kind of music that much. So everything is new for everybody all the time. That's kind of the way I look at it.
I actually also think, this might be controversial to say, but I think getting a stylistic agreement on the Bach is more challenging. We need more guidance from Dr. Weinert on that. Even with all the intricacies of, sensible and non-unsensible language in the Hannah Lash piece, the speech rhythms are more familiar to us. They're coming more out of our contemporary moment. And even though the notes are really challenging, I actually feel like the Bach is going to be harder to make a real success. And I appreciate Dr. Weinert's, invocation of, getting ourselves past the stage of concentrating on getting the notes right and into the stage of making the drama of the piece come alive. But I have great hopes.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, listen, we have a couple of questions that have come in from audience members. And so Hannah, the first one is for you. And the question is, what's the difference between writing for a vocal ensemble versus an instrumental ensemble? And are there different ways you approach the composition process?
Well, yes, there's a lot of different ways. I mean, the most maybe on the surface difference is the difference of text and the fact that the text is there and it's got to come across and you got to have a relationship to it. So you want to be able to either really highlight it and have it be sort of driving the bus, or the music is driving the bus and the text is kind of there, or there's going to be kind of this elbowy relationship where you're really creating something of a tension between the music and the text. So there's certainly that textual element that is maybe the biggest one in my mind. And it matters to me particularly much because the writing of texts matters to me a lot, and what that all entails as its own separate craft. So the other thing too is, these are human voices, and how are you going to kind of relate to that aspect of the instrument, which is a very different thing than even a wind instrument, which is kind of closely related. But the human voice, it's so very, it is so tied up in who we are and what we are as humans and our basic, form of communication. And so that sense of the instrument is really particularly, I don't know, I was going to say onerous, but that makes it sound burdensome, which I don't mean it to be. But, I feel a particular sense of maybe urgency to really relate to that instrument as a very corporeal human thing. And then the other part of it, too, is that the tradition of choral music means a lot to me. I've spent oodles of time with 16th century counterpoint and then moving forward into newer works as well, but that I feel as though the sort of seat of much of my compositional technique comes in fact from 16th century polyphony. So, and then, certainly one can't ignore the fact that music notation itself developed out of text. It was there as a mnemonic to remember the, melodies that we were singing, that we were putting to text, so the idea of notation itself is so tied to language. So I think those are sort of the things that I would really cite as, the ones that are probably in the forefront of my mind when I write for voice. as being ones that I really take into very special consideration, that are a little separate from the instrumental concerns.
So this next question is, it's a pretty, I don't know if I'd say deep question, but challenging question. And it comes from somebody who wrote in, and they said, can we discuss how musicians and listeners sift through disinformation? Meaning, how can music propagate crucial listening and analytical skills that are needed as a human being? And so we often talk about, you know, music, how it enriches our lives and enriches our souls and all those things. But here's a specific question about, can it actually help us to listen better to things outside of music? And any thoughts on that?
Can I jump in, because this is one of my favorite aspects of this piece that's given me the most thought as well. If you're listening to this piece, you can just listen to it. You don't know Latin, and say for some reason you're like, you can't hear the English words because you're like in another room. You're just hearing the sounds. It will be a very pleasant song to listen to. A lot of interesting musical material. And even if you are listening to the Latin, you can hear it, and you might not even catch that there are some words that just Google Translate does not go from Latin to English. So we'll be singing, and all of a sudden the word tinfoil will pop up. And if you're not listening critically and carefully, you will miss that. And I in that first Zoom session with Hannah Lash, I had to ask, I'm obsessed with this word tinfoil. What do we do with the word tinfoil? And I loved her response, which was like, tinfoil just is. Just let it be. Don't try to, make it nasally or something. Just sing it as you would in your studio. And so that kind of gets back to your critical listening. If you're not critically listening, those moments can fly by. I believe dawn is like the morning sunrise. Dawn is another word that Google just does not recognize as a possible potential Latin word. And so we'll sing the word dawn and then in the middle of this Latin text. And so again, that moment can just blow by you if you're not really paying close attention, which just goes back to that absurdist element. I have a lot more thoughts, but I'm sure other people do. So I will end there.
I'll throw in that the other word that Google Translate didn't recognize is loons, which at one point we sing 100 loons, which the altos have decided is going to be the subtitled name for chorale.
Nice.
Well, I'm going to throw, when you said disinformation, right? You did say that, right? Was that the question?
Yeah.
It had to do with disinformation. We think of information as words, but information is also just plain musical information, musical detail. And, something that comes to mind for me, I think really many musicians, not just singers, will see something like a long triplet. And a long triplet, like a half note triplet filling a measure, is often a signal to people, well, just to guess. I think I kind of know what this should feel like, so I'll just kind of do something that's close. And that's really not good enough. I mean, we're still working on that, but no, there's really a precise rhythmic piece of information here, and you have to get it right. And so you really have to parse what are the parts of it, how do we divide that mentally so that it is, I'll just say, more accurate or hopefully perfectly accurate. But you could translate that to, the idea of information in the world conveyed by words. Some people, let's say politicians maybe, use language really carefully, and most don't, and maybe even deceptively at times. So just to really look at what's on the page and focus on what it really means and really execute it, I think maybe that can transfer into other areas of life, that we're looking at something really carefully.
That's great.
Yeah, I'd love to sort of jump in a little bit, because I love what you just said about this actually having even more implications than sort of a textual one as well. And for me too, the sense is that, there is so much to be gained from an experience of listening if you also have listened to a world of other things as well. So we sort of build an inner architecture, an inner listening architecture. And the more that we listen to a lot of music, the better we can listen to a lot of music. So that's something that's also really, really fascinating to me. And I think the other thing about it that for me expands to the world writ large, not just musically, is that, you know, if you do have your ears open in kind of an empathetic way, you can pick up so much meaning that is not literally on the surface of what's being said. And in some sense, like the phenomenon of internet language is a great example of that. For example, like you get the aroma of something just by the way it's worded, by the way it's punctuated. You understand like what generation that person is from, depending upon how they punctuate or use emojis or whatever. And in some ways, those are all actually really sort of like musical articulations in a sense. So I love that idea of, you know, experientially, we can build empathy through listening.
That's great. I'll just add, I've played a lot of contemporary music, and especially early on, trying to figure out what does this mean and what am I trying to communicate? And in talking with audiences, I realized that there are some pieces of music that we understand what's being communicated, either because we've heard it many times or it's a familiar sound, it's the familiar harmonies. But so much of what we do can still be communicated, even though it's a new language. Joy, sadness, anger, excitement, those things that come out of that piece, they don't have to sound familiar, but they can still be communicated, and we can listen for those things. And then, Hannah, as you said, I think the more we listen and the more we are exposed to, the deeper we listen and the more that we hear. So I thought that was a fantastic question. So whoever wrote that in, thanks so much. We love that. I'm going to ask one last one, and this doesn't have to be composers, or it can be an individual. But the question was, I would love to know some of your musical influences and how they have impacted your work. So again, I assume we've all come to music because of music we've heard, people we've interacted with, things that have really influenced us and give us direction. So I'm actually going to start with Karen and see who your musical influences are.
I hope you have time to add another hour. You know, I've been lucky enough to do a really wide range of music. And so I'm a good poster child for, you know, the contemporary moment when we've all heard so many different things. So I would put Michaud really high on the list and Stravinsky, but I'd also put Joni Mitchell and Sly and Robbie, the bass drum duet. And I did a lot of touring of 20th century choral repertoire. So I'm really, you know, from Mahler to Schoenberg to Zemlinsky, I really am in love with the 20th century still. And, you know, and Bartok and Ellington, and, you know, and I look forward to who's next. You know, I've heard several of Hannah Lash's pieces over the years. This is the first one I've gotten to work on. You know, I feel like if you ask me in 20 years, that may be part of my imprint. That's what's great. It keeps changing.
Nice. Excellent. And James, how about you?
Yes, I feel like this changes month to month, year to year. I would say, but in terms of influence, I seem to keep going back to early German Baroque. I love Schein, I love Schütz. And then I love the later Baroque, Bach, Handel. But there's times where I just want to listen to Renaissance music. There's Brahms. I keep coming back to Brahms. But I also really like the direction that contemporary choral music is going and how it is tying a lot of contemporary issues into the composition. I mean, for me, this absurdity in this piece, for whatever reason, reminds me of of it seems strange to say, but climate change. Like, you know, we have all this, we were talking about disinformation, misinformation, that there is not action on this issue that is going to cause, you know, a lot of bad things, that just to keep it simple, is absurd. And and for whatever reason, I keep thinking about that when we're singing this piece. So and that is a testament to this piece, that it makes you think about a wide array of issues. So I really like that, that aspect of contemporary choral music, and I'm looking forward to participating in that as we move forward.
Nice. Dr. Weinert, what do you think?
Well, you know, the word influence, it just makes me think of why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I here now doing what I'm doing? And rather than a composer, I mean, I would say just my experiences, particularly in high school and college, and just the experience of the choral ensemble itself. I had to write a short paper, I remember, in college about, you know, philosophy of music education or something like that. And I just kept coming back to the physical sensation of being next to a bunch of people who were all vibrating. I was a clarinet player, still am a clarinet player too. And, you know, to be in an orchestra where everything is vibrating, there, your body just starts to vibrate in a way that's not like anything else. And I would say singing is very different, of course, from playing an orchestra, but that sensation is really addictive for me. And if I could be just singing in choirs all the time, I would do that. But this seemed to be a little bit more sensible for me, so I'm conducting instead. But getting to be in that environment, that's the biggest influence.
Nice. Hannah, how about for you?
Yeah, I love what everybody just said just now and identify with a great deal of it. So, you know, as I was mentioning before, I think for me, one of the things that I find to be like the seat of my compositional, I don't know, the center in a way, I would have to point to Renaissance counterpoint. I really would, Renaissance polyphony. So Jaska, you know, is a huge composer for me. But then, you know, moving forward from that, the 17th century is fascinating. Once this idea of sort of freeing up of dissonance, which is a little bit of a misnomer when you really understand what's going on, but yet there are things like, you know, the appoggiatura that suddenly becomes a really creatively used thing at that point, and these emphasized dissonances and this real sort of, you know, permeability between the major and the minor third, which is also really fascinating. And then, you know, from there, Bach would have to be another one that I keep on returning to, that certainly for me is like, you know, my compositional food. And then from there, there's so much else that I just gravitate towards on a truly visceral level. You know, one of my most engaging sort of physical musical experiences, some of them have happened in orchestras, you know, and a couple of them are actually with Bartok, for example. So one of them I remember playing, I was playing first harp in Bluebeard's Castle or the Round Top Festival in Texas. And it was the moment right before Judith comes in, her first entrance, and the first harp needs to play a chord to bring her in. And it's this magical thing. And I just remember I was sort of having a little bit of an out of body experience in this, or maybe it was just so imminent. It was just overwhelming. Anyway, I sort of forgot to play my chord because I was listening to everything around me in this extraordinary way. And I was just like really stunned by everything. And the conductor was waiting, and yeah. So we were whipping. I was, fortunately, it was a rehearsal. It was not a performance. But anyway, that was, you know, one of them. And I just remember thinking to myself, you know, I'm just so lucky. I'm so lucky. And then later on in that same opera, it wasn't a stage. We didn't do it staged, but in the door to the Riches, there's this extraordinary color, which is generated with the celeste and the harp doing this little ostinato, and then the violin, a solo violin and a horn have this melodic thing that come in, and the color that happens in that moment is just so, oh my God, beyond description. It's beyond description. And just being there in that orchestra with the cellist right beside me, creating this color, you know, sort of all of this happening immersively was just unbelievable. And there's countless other experiences. But I guess in that regard, I would definitely have to say that for me too, it's a very visceral, very physical thing. And I do think that relates also and is very much part and parcel of my experience as a dancer as well, as the sense of absolute visceral involvement in, you know, the articulation of space, the articulation of vibration. So that, yeah.
Fantastic. I have to say you are all wonderful, and I would love to continue this conversation. Let's get together at Java's and sometime and keep it going. But our time is come to an end here. And so I just want to thank you all so much for being a part of this. To all of you, please join me in thanking Bill, Hannah, Karen, and James for just such a thoughtful conversation. And I hope you enjoyed this behind the scenes peek into our Centennial Celebration Commissioning Project. I hope you'll all tune in tomorrow, 3 o'clock, for the Eastman Chorale performance, featuring the premiere of Hannah's new composition. And hopefully you will, if you are in Rochester, you will attend in person in Kodak Hall at Eastman Theater, or you can join us online. Simply go to our homepage, and at the bottom right corner, you'll find a link to the live stream. Our second event in the Conversations with Composer series is going to take place on March 23rd, and it's going to feature the Eastman Percussion Ensemble collaboration with Pulitzer Prize-winning composer and former faculty member Joseph Schwantner and Grammy Award-winning pianist and composer Billy Childs. So I hope you'll join us on March 23rd. So to all of you, thank you for being here. To our guests, thanks so much for being part of this conversation. And we look forward to seeing you on stage on Kodak Hall tomorrow. Thanks so much.